Mr. Mayor, you are now live.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'd like to start this evening's meeting by acknowledging we're gathered here today on the traditional lands of the Coast Salish people. And with a quorum being present, I'd like to call this meeting to order. First item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Could I get a motion to adopt the agenda as circulated? Moved by Councillor Manhas, seconded by Councillor Caljouw. All in favor? And opposed? Motion carries. We'll now move on to adoption of minutes. Could I get a motion to adopt the minutes from the September 12th, 2023 meeting? Moved by Councillor Justice, seconded by Councillor Toporowski. Any discussion? All in favor? And opposed? Motion carries. We'll now move on to public input on agenda items. We have a policy of a maximum of 5 people each. However, there are 7 who have signed up today. I'll ask council if you would like to stick to the 5 or waive the requirement to allow all 7. Waive? I think as long as there's consensus, we don't need a motion. Okay, we'll allow the 7 speakers. So I'll invite the, I'll start with the folks in the in the gallery, then we'll move to the virtual attendees. And just a reminder to anyone, if this is your first time at public input, it's a maximum of 3 minutes regarding an item on the agenda. So I'd like to welcome Eileen Nielsen. Ms. Nielsen, if you could come up to the lectern and state your name and address.
My name is Eileen Nielsen, and now I live in Cowichan. Before my 3 minutes starts, I would like to make a sacred request as a result of something that happened recently at the natural gas meeting. And what I would like to ask is that councillors put down their devices, stop looking at their computers, and demonstrate to me that you're actually listening.
Ms. Nielsen, what you're doing now is public input, and I hear what you're saying about devices.
I just would like that respect paid to me before I start what I have to say.
Yeah, we can do it for the public input, but during the meeting, there are things that come up while we're meeting, and when I started on council 9 years ago, there was less using the devices. Now it's part of how our meetings operate. So I can give you my full attention right now, but during the meeting, there will be some of us who have to deal with items on our devices.
During the meeting, but I'm hoping that for my 3 minutes, I can be shown that respect.
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah,
Thank you for hearing that. I appreciate it. I'm very concerned actually with the actions that North Cowichan Council are attempting to take. I want to acknowledge that I think all of you are doing you know, the best you can do under the circumstances. The fact that there's an agenda being put forward that not everybody, especially the Cowichan citizens, agree to, is something that should be discussed. And what I want to refer to is there were 2 climate town hall sessions that were presented by COPE here in the Valley. And at both of those sessions, the seats for North Cowichan Council were empty. And my question is, what's it going to take for you to listen to ideas that are different than your own?
Ms. Nielsen, I hate to interrupt, but the public inputs on items on the agenda. So the one item on the agenda. Well,
the climate, are we not talking about climate tonight, 5.1?
Well, we're talking about the climate change adaptation strategy engagement report. So that's,
to me, it's all part parcel of the same thing. If we're not willing to acknowledge that North Cowichan is not engaging with what the citizens would like them to hear outside of this venue, then I need to make that point.
Okay, but it is a specific item here. But
Why are you arguing with me? Why can't you just accept what I'm saying and just?
Because I'm the chair of this meeting, and I'm saying you've gone beyond what is on this agenda. But you've provided your input, and I think we'll have to agree to disagree.
It's so disrespectful that you would even pigeonhole people into 3 minutes.
I don't agree.
Well, you agree or not agree. I'm just
okay.
stating my truth.
Well, thanks for your input. I'd now like to welcome the next speaker up to the lectern. I just got a first name, Adrienne. I believe it's Adrienne.
Sorry, I didn't put my last
I assumed it was you.
Just know.
Yeah, no, I figured it was you. If you could just state your name and address. And,
it's Adrienne. I live on Fairview Way.
North Cowichan received a grant of $150,000 from the UBCM for the climate change adaptation strategy. So I guess we're now beholden to following through regardless of public input, as Councillor Istace mentioned regarding the UBCM last meeting. So why are we even here? Because surveys like this then allow the dialogue later to include extensive public input when you create life-changing policies through a climate lens. And as I've gone back and looked at the numbers from the past extensive public input that completely transformed North Cowichan's trajectory and our lives, from the OCP to the CAP, they do not represent large numbers, and at some point there needs to be a pushback and accountability for what you consider public input. These surveys also lead to policy by proposing that a majority of people align with the creation of the new policy. Myself, COPE, and others are well versed in where these policies lead in the long run. The primary purpose is to develop a foundation of regional and local climate change knowledge. The survey had nowhere to express your knowledge around climate change. There also is not open questions about innovative ideas that the public may have to contribute to adapting. Issues. The questions such as, which of the following climate hazards have you experienced in North Cowichan, have zero contextual meaning, but just add the word hazard in there so you manipulate the meaning in the outcome. The so-called public engagement had 20 people attending in person and 156 online. 12 were not North Cowichan residents, which equals 0.51% of your population. So not even 1% of 32,000 people participated in this. Multiple questions you had to press yes or no to move on, which skewed the results. Some questions allowed other, but pressing other, it then just allowed for data manipulation by placing the other into a category, any category agreeing with climate issues. Then it allowed Social Planning Cowichan to speak on behalf of all vulnerable people. But we cannot access this data as they are not a public entity. We have a whole committee dedicated to, what's the one that you're on? The Accessibility Committee. And so I'm not sure why we didn't get the Accessibility Committee to actually reach out to people that were vulnerable. And then they had, then they went and they spoke to grade 5, 6 children to talk about mental health, which I also did not agree with at all. So all in all, I'm just saying that I think that these surveys need to be done better and engage people in a different way. And somehow we can hopefully figure out how to engage the actual public, because this is just really just me and some other people filling out the surveys. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Now I'd like to invite Paul O'Rourke up to the lectern. Mr. O'Rourke, if you could state your name and address.
Hello, my name is Paul O'Rourke from Chemainus Road, Chemainus. I have 3 minutes. I probably won't use it because someone else has actually spoken to that which I wished to address. And I would like to speak specifically to the 4 members of council who voted last Friday, or last Tuesday, to pass the motion that we would be moving to the next stage of the
Mr. O'Rourke,
piece. That's what this is about, so please don't...
No, Mr. O'Rourke, you're straying too far. The focus right now is on the climate change adaptation.
And that's exactly what I'm trying to refer to.
But it's not on the step code or the zero energy step code. That's not what we're discussing at today's council meeting. If you would like to discuss the adaptation strategy, if you'd like to discuss the adaptation strategy, that's fair game. We're not talking about the step code from the last meeting.
I would formally like to state right here and right now that this council behaves extremely inappropriately, does not listen to its constituents, and I find the behaviour of councillors...
Yeah, Mr. O'Rourke, you're out of order right now. You're out of order right now.
Unacceptable.
You're out of order. Like we have rules in our meeting.
This is completely unacceptable, but this council refuses to listen. The entire town turned up.
Mr. O'Rourke, I'm going to declare a 5-minute recess for council right now.
Do your job.
I am doing my job.
You're not listening.
We're declaring a 5-minute recess, okay?
Mr. Mayor, you are now live.
All right, we're now going to resume this council meeting, and I'd like to return to public input. Mr. O'Rourke, I'm going to invite you back up to the lectern, but I've just asked Mr. O'Rourke, out of respect for council, just keep it focused as much as you can on the agenda item, and I'll give you your full 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that respect, and the members of council. I wish to actually ask questions that have an answer, so I will cede the rest of my time, and I will return with question and answer time.
Great. Thank you, Mr. O'Rourke. I'd now like to invite Kate McDonald up to the lectern. Ms. McDonald, if you could state your name and address, and again, it's 3 minutes.
Cowichan Valley. So regarding that survey with the mental health, when they surveyed the class of grade 5 and 6 children, I think had those children known that they're going to lose their family homes due to a prohibitive cost of a retrofit, I'd hazard a guess that most of you don't know how much a retrofit is going to cost. Does anybody know? Well, I've done the research and it's $200,000 for an average family home. And the federal government is currently giving out $5,000 grants and or very limited number of loans for up to $40,000. So that's $45,000 towards $200,000, and it doesn't quite cut it. So where will the other $155,000 come from in households with barely enough money to buy groceries or pay their bills month to month? Or is a multi-six-figure income now going to be a prerequisite for living in Cowichan to cover all the impending added climate expenses and taxes? I'm sure that would have been on the top of their list of what they're most worried about. Certainly not the minuscule percentage of emissions that they might actually be contributing to the climate change crisis. The reason why these and all children are so worried about climate change is because they're constantly being bombarded by half-truths and terror tactics. There's no informed consent to any of your climate agenda policies because the science is cherry-picked to suit your government-funded narratives. The children should in fact be worried about, or rather terrified, by the boogeymen and women who are voting to adopt all the official community plans and proposals which will devastate life as their young lives know it today. And these policies will impact you as well. Do you have $200,000 socked away for a retrofit? Any of you? Or does the government funding cover these expenses for those who toe the line? And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. I'll move on to the next speaker, Robert Thompson. Mr. Thompson, come up to the lectern, state your name and address, and again, it's 3 minutes.
I'm Robert Thompson of Neville Lane Drive, North Cowichan. Mr. Mayor, councillors, I want to address some of the underlying concerns with the survey, the action plan, and the step codes. So I'm having a house built, and I had an option. I either go to some sort of rock wool insulation on the outside or a high-performance ventilation system. And my thought was, I should do both, because I know they're going to jack up the price of electricity. So the less of it that I use, the better. So get right at it. Wealth. Let's talk about wealth. Wealth is proportional to energy consumption. It's also proportional to energy production, and some of it's been offshored to China. But you are proposing to actually impair the wealth of all of your citizens. Who do you really serve with this? You have to keep asking these questions. I was accosted after last week's meeting by a local solar power fanatic and described as not believing in science. But there are at least two types of scientists: honest researchers and bureaucratic scientists. The honest group will not falsify data or produce conclusions contrary to their findings. The bureaucrats will produce findings to support political programs or corporate agenda. These are not the scientists that you need to have listened to. I have an article which I failed to get printed and downloaded, but I will email that to members of council this week, with some honest climate scientists actually coming out of Calgary, so you even get some Canadian content. As Barbie the doll was once programmed to say, math is hard, there was an uproar. But it is. But so is real science. There's a massive data. It requires time and expertise to assess the conclusions, and that's even if you know what the sampling involves. The climate science is being cherry-picked, it's corrupt, and it's challenging for non-experts to assess. We are told that the planet is boiling. Give me a break. Evidently, the UN Secretary General has confused Fahrenheit for centigrade. And where 100 centigrade actually is boiling, perhaps the Secretary General was talking about the water temperature in Miami, which was 100 degrees. Or maybe he was just looking at the bikinis. I'm out of time. I will send a proper science climate assessment around.
Great, thank you for your input. I'll now move on to next speaker, Stephen Lay. Mr. Lay, if you can come up to the lectern and state your name and address.
Stephen Lay, Crofton, BC. For the record, I'm a layman, a generalist, unblinded by the specialist's narrow focus. As you may have noticed, the world has changed since we were all last here. Hard to pick a most illuminating quote this week, but this one from Richard Grove stood out for me. If you don't understand history, you will not understand current events. May I suggest we now stand at the confluence of many of the currents of history. Perhaps you have heard of a book called Plutocrats, The Rise of the New Global Super-Rich and the Fall of Everyone Else. Do you know who wrote it? She stood clapping enthusiastically in our House of Commons not long ago for a countryman of her grandfather's, also a Nazi officer who allegedly stole a Jewish Ukrainian's business close to 100 years ago. Fairly recent history. The author, member of the WEF Board of Directors, and our Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland. Fake name? Meanwhile, Mrs. Zelensky, right in front of her, looked horrified, barely clapping, appeared to mouth, "I know." How is this relevant to the trajectory North Cowichan is currently initiating? Well, the Council is determined, despite the general lack of support from constituents, to speed up the climate timeline as laid out by the provincial and federal governments. I ask you, if the federal government is incapable of ascertaining the historical reality of someone for whom they're giving standing ovations, one would think a fairly simple task. How are we to believe they actually have a firm grasp on the realities of something as complex as climate? I hope that someone gets my message in the bottle. We are told that Council wishes to send a message despite the fact that the numbers are at best negligible. 330 units of carbon versus 340 should we follow the plan as laid out by the province in line with national and supranational organizations, or something like a 0.5% difference. North Cowichan's population at 32,000 represents 0.0004% of 8 billion. Now, I'm not an actuary, so I can't tell you the next equations, but what seems obvious to me, though I am just a layman, is that this sped-up timeline will serve no purpose whatsoever except to make the lives of those in North Cowichan more difficult. So, what message exactly is Council trying to send that rather than focusing on measures that will make a difference, they choose to limit choice, to force people into a course of action that will not change ultimate outcomes? I struggle to find any other meaning in this message. I cannot see it as an SOS to the world, but rather as a distraction from the important task at hand of ensuring that the plutocratic medical military death complex stops forcing its industrial disease upon the average world citizen and make the valley the self-sufficient paradise it can so clearly be.
Thanks, Mr. Lay. I'd now like to invite the last in-person speaker up to the lectern, Joyce Benson. Ms. Benson, if you come up and state your name and address.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, and thank you for hearing us tonight, everybody who's out. When did climate become more important at a municipal level, this is a rhetorical question, than roads, water, sewer, garbage, recreation, parks, public safety, police, and fire? Well, I would say it probably became really important in about 2013 when the Council of the Day approved an additional tax just like that, called CAPE, Climate Action Energy Plan, 0.5% to supposedly, this is the biggest joke of the century, reduce emissions in North Cowichan with a Trans-Canada highway driving right on through that the taxpayers have no control over, but we've been being charged a tax for 10 years. So the Climate Action Energy Plan tax annually collects $156,000 originally to now it's up to $184,000 each year. The reserve fund is sitting with over $500,000 sitting in it. Council hired in August 2019 to go along with the whole climate activism, an environmental specialist. Specialist became a new word in hiring in our municipality at about that time. Dr. David Preekshop for $112,000 plus at that time, August 2019. Invasive parrot feather in Somenos Creek and lake still needs to be removed. I drive by it all the time, choking the waterways. Still no solution for Cowichan Lake, algae bloom. Reserve fund for Cowichan Lake sitting at $527,000 currently. The problem's still the problem. Maybe aeration, we hear. July 2022, council hired a climate change specialist. Like I say, new word, specialist. Jennifer, it's either Adcroft or Aldcroft, I apologize, for $109,000. The director of engineering, who used to be in charge of roads, water, sewer, garbage, and all that good stuff, Dave Conway, is now, I'm not sure of his full title, a climate engineer. Plus costly staff time for all the meetings and these consultants that you keep hiring on top of all of this levels of bureaucracy. And donating the Climate Action Energy Plan tax dollars by 20% each year to supposedly local organizations that are trying to reduce emissions, 80% to go to staff to figure out how to reduce emissions in North Cowichan, when they should be doing that out of the operations and capital projects funding, not an additional tax on us. So the Cape Reserve funds, like I say, December 2022, approximately $500,000 sitting there. Climate Action Energy Plan aims to reduce municipal energy consumption 80% by 2050. This is unrealistic and an unreasonable cost to place on North Cowichan citizens and taxpayers overall. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Bessa. I'll now turn to,
I forgot. There's no end date on this tax.
great, thanks. I'll now turn to IT staff and ask if there are any virtual attendees with their hands raised.
There are no hands raised.
All right, we'll now move on to staff reports. Item 5.1, Climate Change Adaptation Strategy Engagement Report. Mr. Swaby.
Mr. Mayor, the purpose of this report is to review the progress and provide feedback to urban systems and the environmental staff on the engagement conducted to inform the development of the climate change adaptation strategy. We have a presentation from staff and urban systems. And then we can deal with the recommendation, which is that the Committee of the Whole directs staff to seek input from the Environmental Advisory Committee through review of key findings of the engagement phase of work after the presentations.
Great, thank you, Mr. Swaby. Welcome, Ms. Halcroft.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm here this evening to provide you with an update on the development of our climate change adaptation strategy. This project was initiated from Council's strategic plan, responding to the priority to develop a comprehensive climate change risk and vulnerability strategy, and work has been subsequently funded by a grant from the Disaster Risk Reduction Climate Adaptation Program administered by UBCM and funded by the province. Climate adaptation addresses the impacts that climate change has on built, natural, or social systems. It does not address reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. We're working with the Cowichan Valley Regional District staff throughout this project, and while their work to date has been broad, we've been focusing on work specific to the municipality, how our municipal infrastructure, operations, facilities, and services are resilient to climate hazards in our region. We commissioned urban systems through a competitive process to help with their expertise on development of our plan. And to that end, I'd like to introduce Erin Coelho, Climate Change and Water Resources Specialist at Urban Systems, and also our project lead. Erin will be participating electronically to provide key findings from the initial engagement work that's happened on this project, and both me and him will be available after for any comments and questions. So with that, over to Erin on the screen.
Welcome.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good evening, Mayor and Council and all the attendees. Thank you for welcoming me virtually tonight. I'm just going to share content here. Started. Okay, good evening. So the purpose of today's presentation is, as Jennifer stated, is to walk through the phase 1 activities and findings for North Cowichan's climate risk and vulnerability assessment. So as an agenda, first we'll be talking about introducing the project and the timeline of the project, and then we'll go into the phase 1 activities, which are comprised of 3 parts, which is understanding the foundational resources that are available to build on for this work. Also talking about staff knowledge and guidance and how that's an important factor throughout the project. And then also summarizing the engagement activities to date. So this project is meant to address climate vulnerabilities and risks. So we're talking about the hazards that are experienced: flooding, wildfire, heat waves, drought, those things that have the ability to disrupt municipal services and impact the lives of residents in the region and in North Cowichan, and how the municipality can take action to reduce some of those impacts. So the first phase is to understand the local context and concerns, which has now been completed. The second phase is to take all that information and build off of it and conduct a vulnerability and risk assessment. And the idea behind this process is to help North Cowichan prioritize where they can have the best bang for their buck when they're with limited resources to address the risks of climate change. It also helps to identify strengths that exist already in the community and in the region, and identify gaps, and also to help prioritize what are the highest risks and where should we be spending more focus time. The third phase will take all that information and help to develop a strategy that integrates into existing processes and promotes implementation and collaboration. Okay, so one of the first pieces of the project was to do a scan of what already exists in the region and within North Cowichan that already adds to your natural resilience to climate change. So the key thing here is that North Cowichan is not starting from scratch. You know, the climate hazards we're talking about are not new. They've been experienced before. And climate change is showing that we can expect more of that in greater frequency and greater severity. So how adequate are the current resilience of different systems for North Cowichan, and where can we build on strengths and identify gaps? So this starts with everything from the provincial risk assessment that identifies some of the key risks facing our province, all the way through to the Cowichan Valley Regional District's recent work over the last several years, where they've done regional projections for the area, as well as undertaken specific vulnerability and risk assessments around flooding, landslides, geohazards, wildfire. They've also identified adaptation and risk management actions that in collaboration with North Cowichan. So there's a good foundation of work there to build on. Beyond that, North Cowichan itself has many resources available that support resilience in the community. The official community plan has a very strong ecological climate action framework that is built in throughout. So there's already a lot of work and a climate lens that's put on a lot of the decision making in North Cowichan. There's also lots of existing work like the airshed strategy, asset management plan, the recent biodiversity work, the Community Wildfire Protection Plan. These are just a few of the resources that are out there and available, and that North Cowichan leverages for climate resilience. So the second piece of that of the phase is just to share how staff is heavily involved in this project. A lot of the understanding around how past climate events and potential future climate events could impact North Cowichan services is really within staff's knowledge. There's people who've been working with the municipality for many years and have an intimate knowledge of all the systems and the past events and potential for future disruptions. And so there's a steering committee made up of all the directors from the departments across North Cowichan, and they are heavily involved in the project. There are several steering committee meetings planned and have taken place throughout the project, in which staff is able to provide guidance on this project and also provide their knowledge to build on. So some of the things we've heard right off the bat was to begin with the end in mind. This strategy is meant to be something that's not pie in the sky. It's meant to be achievable. It's meant to have prioritized actions. It's meant to align with annual budgeting and project planning cycles, so that there's a seamless transition of the work that's identified here into the planning process and the implementation for staff. So through this work and through the engagement with staff, we've learned a lot about the services at North Cowichan and how climate change could be impacting them. And so these are some of the foundational items and lenses that we're taking forward into the next step. In addition to the foundational resources and the staff knowledge, there has been several engagement activities. There's been some Indigenous engagement, and we'll summarize that shortly, as well as the community online survey, and some interviews with interested parties, including Island Health, Social Planning Cowichan, Cowichan Valley Regional District, Western Forest Products, and Paper Excellence. With the Indigenous engagement, there are 6 nations that are in the neighborhood of North Cowichan and keen for North Cowichan to engage with. Those are Cowichan tribes, Liaxin Nation, Halalt, Penelakut, Snuneymuxw, and Suminis. All of these communities have been delivered a letter through their formal referrals process to inform them about the project and ask how they would like to be engaged. There's continued follow-up going on around that. There's also been a workshop held with Cowichan tribes, Liaxin, and Halalt, where we discussed this project in more depth and got their input. Cannot summarize that input at this point, as it's currently being vetted by those communities to make sure that we're accurately capturing their voice. There was also a community survey that was launched on July 13th, and this was meant to be a pulse check with the community to understand their top concerns around climate change, things that they're taking action on themselves, and areas where North Cowichan can improve. So there was 14 questions to this, and it was accompanied by location mapping and places for questions and answers. So there were several questions and answers outside of the survey itself. There was also open-ended questions where folks could add their 2 cents. So this survey closed on August 7th. There was 156 responses. 26 of the questions were answered, and there was 3 interactions with the online map. So there's lots of results for this survey that are summed up in the What We Heard report, and we're only going to show a subset here tonight, just to highlight some of what we heard. So one of the questions was to get a sense of the types of hazards that community members have experienced and are concerned about in the community. And so with that, we have a couple strong points here that extreme heat, water shortages, and drought are the answers that were most chosen by the most respondents, followed by extreme rainfall, extreme wind, and flooding. Wildfires, landslides, coastal storm surge, and sea level rise had less of a response. And that might go to show that, wildfire has happened in areas of North Vancouver or Vancouver Island, but not necessarily right on the doorstep of North Cowichan. Community members were also asked what impacts from climate events are they most concerned about. And of course, there's only a few here. These are ones that we've heard through other engagement. And there's an option for open-ended responses as well. So the most popular response was damage to the natural environment. And this is something that we've heard from the interested parties, from staff, and from community members that, one of the most important factors when it comes to living in Vancouver Island and in North Cowichan is the natural environment, access to such beautiful places. So people were very concerned about that. The second was temporary loss of municipal services. So of course, our quality of life depends on a lot of the services that municipalities provide to their residents. And so it's not surprising to see that this is an important thing for the community and actually a focus area for this project. There was also a response around impacts to vulnerable populations and also understanding the physical and mental health impacts of climate change. The next two questions were to state your level of agreement with the following. So the effects of climate change pose a threat to North Cowichan communities. There was 58% that strongly agreed, 23% that agreed, and then 19% who were neutral or disagreed. So one in five don't see necessarily climate change as a major issue. There's also a question around the municipality's preparedness to respond to climate hazards. And there's a pretty strong sentiment that either neutral or disagree or strongly agree, counting for over 80%. Shows some areas, and the whole point of the project is to kind of move the dial in that area. So there were several interviews as well with interested parties in the region. These include Social Planning Cowichan, the Cowichan Valley Regional District, two major employers, Paper Excellence and Western Forest Products, and Island Health, as well as the engagement that was done by some of the teachers with the youth. There were some pretty strong themes that came through here. A lot of the interested parties talked again about the environment, particularly Island Health made the connection between the health of the environment and all the downstream impacts that happen from climate hazards. And taking care of the environment is one way to create broad resilience. Social Planning Cowichan and Island Health both talked about vulnerable populations being more susceptible to some of the negative health, mental, and physical impacts of climate change. With Paper Excellence and Western Forest Products, both major employers, they had they're taking actions themselves to address climate change, but areas where there's mills down by in the estuaries or in the sea level, they're susceptible to sea level rise, to coastal storm surge. They talked about access to their sites being an issue during flooding. With Paper Excellence, they're highly dependent on the Cowichan River water supply. So they were concerned about, particularly this summer around drought and having to shut down for periods of time due to water shortages. Cowichan Valley Regional District, we were able to talk to their emergency management team, and they handle a lot of the emergency management, of course, for North Cowichan as well. And they had some concerns around atmospheric rivers, just that rapid onset of flooding being quite destructive. So just a different type of flooding than necessarily riverine flooding, which is also an issue. They also mentioned that drought in the region, in some areas of the regional district, has been going on for 7 years. So this year, was at forefront, but it's a pretty consistent thing for some areas. And with that, that's a summary of phase one. This provides a solid foundation for moving forward into the next steps. So we have all the foundational resources, understanding kind of strengths and gaps that already exist, both in the region and within North Cowichan. And we've started to make some collaborative introductions with different interested parties, as well as some of the First Nations communities. With climate change being something that doesn't respect municipal boundaries, there's lots of opportunity for collaboration. So this has been a good start for that. And we now have a solid baseline of information to start conducting that vulnerability and risk assessment to help prioritize and understand where those greatest risks are. So with that, I'll turn it back to Mayor and Council for feedback.
Great, thanks for that. I've got a question from Councillor Manhas, then from Councillor Justice.
Mr. Mayor, I got a number of questions and comments. I'll start first, and then you could cut me off, and I'll come back again.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. How do you pronounce your last name? Is Coles?
Coelho.
Coelho's?
Coelho, you got
okay.
it.
I'll just call you Aaron.
Sounds good.
English is my second language, so I do. So. I got a number of questions. First, I'd like to ask is, why was social planning picked for engagement while, you know, it's on page 21 of the background, it says the intent of the assessment is to take a holistic approach, and a group that is going to be really impacted by climate adaptation and where they can build and not build and stuff is a development community. And there's no sign of them being contacted at all in this. I noticed on most of the climate stuff that whole community is left out. And I think that's a big failure of anything we do on the climate side, because we're not getting the full picture. So I just like to ask you the question: why is social planning picked for the engagement, not the business community, the development community in particular?
Mr. Coelho,
Jen, do you want me to? Do I jump in on this one, Jen?
Sorry, I was just waiting to see if you were. So maybe I could take a first cut at that on behalf of Mr. Coelho. So when we were scoping out this project, we wanted to really focus in on our interested party engagement, on those that represented more vulnerable impacts to the population. So you see a lot of the climate literature, the elderly, the underhoused, the youth are more greatly impacted from impacts of climate change than other populations. So it wasn't meant to exclude the development community. We can by all means go back and take that feedback and look at engaging further on this project. Phase one isn't the only engagement. We're going to be going back later as we develop the strategy as well. So that was the intention of focusing in on our first round of engagement, not meant to be exclusive as we move forward.
On page 23, under options, option 2, that the committee of the whole direct staff to work with urban systems to finalize the engagement phase of the project. And I think it's so important that the development community is involved with this, even the business community. They're the employers. The business community is impacted wholeheartedly, more than actually, could be more than a lot of communities that you guys went to, like the 5 or 6ers and so I think that's really, really important to get that. What municipal services were lost? It said like one of the top on the survey that people responded said was the municipal services were lost. What were they?
So municipal services, it was more of a fear of loss. So not that there has been a loss. In some examples, for example, the fires that took place in Lytton, in that case, the municipal hall was removed and they had to reinitiate a permitting process. Or from a climate change impact perspective, the washout of roads could have infrastructure that needs to be replaced, such as a culvert, which was a local experience that we had with the last atmospheric river event.
Well, we've had floods a long time. WFP's had flooding along this since the mill opened in mid-1970s, so that's nothing new over there. Why were like when it says somebody's lived here for so many years, or how many years somebody has been on the planet, why were those years blacked out? Like it's anonymous.
I believe we blacked out anything that was a personal identifier, but I would have to go back and
But there's
double
no-
check on that one. I'm not sure, Aaron, if you have further details.
Yeah, that's, Counselor, it's basically part of the responsibility around the Freedom of Protection and Information Act. And so those types of information are meant to be kept out. And I know what you mean.
Yeah, because there's
if it
no
is
names,
anonymous.
there's no names attached to or anything that nobody knows. Somebody just says, I lived here 5 years or whatever. It could be anybody. So I don't know why that was blocked out. Are our youth really concerned about climate change, hearing about climate change? I think not, because of the 156 respondents, only 28.8% were under 50 years old. 71.1% were 50 and older. So I don't know what we can take away from this, because most of the people that are 50 or older, they don't care about affordability, because they probably got their own houses already, stuff, right? And they don't, so they don't care about new builds or us going to different levels of step code or nothing like that. So I'm not sure what we can take from this survey, actually, to tell you the truth. Yeah, I'll leave it at that for now.
Councillor Manhas, Councillor Justice.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is with respect to the community survey. Certainly collected lots of rich data from residents from the open-ended questions, but there appears to be little systematic analysis of the responses. And so I was just wondering how you will be analyzing the information, if you will be analyzing the information and in a way that to make it useful. For example, I think that the data is probably voluminous enough that you could look for patterns of concerns by geographical area or even by length of residence. Perhaps. So I guess the basic question is are you going to be doing more with all those open-ended questions and looking for themes in order to move this ahead, or is this sort of a finish?
Aaron, could you address that one?
Yes, so there is no plan at this point to do anything more with the written feedback. There was quite a bit of responses, and they do provide context to some of the data. It is possible to do searches for keywords, just to kind of start theming things up, but there's no plan to do that at this point.
Okay. I mean, my own, informal thematic analysis, I thought it was very, very interesting and rich data. I would say, by and large, most people who have participated are very concerned with increasing risk of droughts and heat waves and forest fires in the summer, and increasing frequency and severity of windstorms and floods in the winter months. I guess what you would expect. A couple of things jumped out, which I think are worth just sort of highlighting. And one of them, I think, is a great number of people referred to increasing risk of toxicity of Cowichan Lake in the heat waves, which I think is really interesting because it's something that our environmental specialist has just recently discovered through the research that he's done, or the team has done, that actually the heat waves are actually resulting in increased periods of toxicity of the lake, or at least the presence of potentially toxic cyanobacteria. So I thought that was pretty interesting. It shows that the message is filtering out to a certain degree. And I think the other thing, which is not surprising at all this year, at least, is the number of people who referred to inundation with smoke from other parts of the continent. So even if we're not having local wildfires, something that is a direct result of climate change is an increasing risk of forest fires somewhere, and the probability that smoke can come and cause health issues here. So just highlighting those two things that I got out of it. But I think there's a lot more that you could get out of that data by having a good qualitative thematic analysis of it. Mr. Mayor, I know we're just going through, and I'm only the second person to ask questions, but when you'd like, I would be happy to make the recommendation.
All right, I know Councillor Manhas might have another. All right, how about we just finish the questions and I'll go back to you.
Sure.
Okay. So Councillor Findlay and Caljouw, your hands went up at the same time. Councillor Caljouw and then Councillor Findlay.
I just have a question about 2.0, what we heard in the community survey. And the questions, like question 4, it says, have you or someone you know experienced financial losses or property damages because of climate hazard or climate event? I think, to me, when I look at that question, I think everybody knows somebody who has been affected. You know, we know business owners in town, you know, hundreds of people who live in this valley. So to me, it just, the question I have is, wouldn't it have been better just to put, have you experienced financial losses or property damage because of climate hazard or climate event, rather than putting in, or someone you know? Does that not skew the percentages of the question? What I'm asking is, I mean, everybody knows somebody who's experienced in this valley, I'm sure, some kind of climate event. Even because, I mean, when the highway was blocked by the flood, I mean, that affects almost every single person in the Cowichan Valley.
Yeah, it's a good question, Councillor. I think the intent was to try and draw people's minds to the potential impacts of climate change, and it's interesting that even the results there, you know, 44% even said no, even though the question was that. So yeah, it's tough to, with the nuances with these questions and with engagement in general. I'm hearing lots of questions and about, you know, do we get the right folks? You know, do we get enough people? Was the representation good? Were the questions right? And these are really hard things to scope in a project, because you're always trying to find that right level of effort given your scope and your timelines. And it's never perfect, but we were really just hoping to get a pulse check, create some awareness, and also know that we're coming back to the community again throughout the project.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Findlay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have 3 pages of comments, questions, literally again. Some are fairly high level and some are in the weeds. So stop me if I'm carrying on to go to someone else if you want. But
Okay. Councillor Manhas got a few in, so it's your turn.
All right, so
yeah.
great. Okay. The survey had 156 participants, which really isn't even close to being statistically valid. As we know, a statistical valid survey is 390 participants for a 5% margin of error and 1,000 participants for 3% margin of error for a community our size. So 156 participants, which really only 144 are locals, is, to my view, not statistically valid. I get more in my Facebook polls. I got 260 in my last one and 631 in the one before that. The time of year to do the survey, in my opinion, was questionable. Being in July and August, you know, there's people away. You know, young people especially are vacationing with their families, as Councillor Manhas talked about. The majority of people who surveyed responded were over 50 years old, 71% of those. 144 responses out of 32,000 is 0.49%, which means 99.51% of our residents didn't respond to this. And we're taking this survey and moving it forward based on the majority, the significant majority, not participating. So I do have a question or a concern about that. I find the questions were quite leading. There wasn't much, well, they're very leading. 2 contributors engaged in the mapping exercise, which I thought was interesting. 113 of the 156 have already taken steps to prepare for climate change. So the people that responded obviously are climate disciples already. The citizen survey that we've talked about before from 2022, 7% said climate was a top priority. 0.49% responded to this survey. So I think the majority of our residents don't think this is a priority at all, and we've already heard that some are questioning why we're even going down this road. I do have a concern about interviewing kids in grade 5 and 6 and scaring them about climate change, but because again, the questions seem to be leading. So I do have a couple questions that are fairly high level to the consultant and our climate change specialist, which encompass the whole concept. Is CO2 a pollutant?
Carbon dioxide is one of the pollutants that the International Panel of Climate Change has indicated that is an anthropogenic caused one of 6 pollutants.
Okay. What percentage of the greenhouse gases in our atmosphere is CO2?
I would have to get back to you on that answer.
Okay, so I can answer that. It's 0.04%. The majority of our greenhouse gases on the planet, 97%, is caused by water vapor. So 0.04% of our, again, this is going high level, obviously. 0.04% of our entire atmosphere is CO2. Humans cause 29 gigatons per year of a total of 750 gigatons of CO2 in our atmosphere every single year. So that works out to 3.8%. If CO2 is 0.04% of the greenhouse gases, and we apparently cause 3.8%, then we're making catastrophic economic decisions based on 3.8% of 0.04%, or 0.00152% of annual greenhouse gas emissions worldwide. And Canada is responsible for 1.89% of world emissions, resulting in 3.8% of 0.04% times 1.89%, or 0.00002873% of greenhouse gas emissions. Stay with me. BC represents 9.6% of Canada's emissions, so 3.8% of 0.04% times 1.8% times 9.6% equals 0.0000276% of worldwide greenhouse gas emissions. North Cowichan's emissions, according to our environmental department, is 337,822 tons per year, or 0.0052% of BC's. So 3.8% of 0.04% times 1.8% times 9.6% times 0.0052% means North Cowichan is responsible for 0.000000144% of worldwide greenhouse gas emissions. And yet we have policies that will cost hundreds of thousands of dollars of our residents' taxes and likely cost millions of dollars in the future. Remember my comment last week about a drop in a fart in Chemainus and smelling it in Croatia? It's actually we're dropping a fart in Chemainus and smelling it in Saturn with these changes that we're actually contemplating. This is insane. I'll stop there for now. I do have more comments.
Councillor Findlay, just general rule, we avoid clapping in here no matter what a person's political, Thanks. Councillor Stash and then Councillor Toporowski. Okay,
thank you, Your Worship.
Stash.
Well, I appreciate Councillor Findlay almost getting through that all in one breath. I saw you take one big gulp there. I guess the only quick rebuttal to that would be, I don't think the big discussion here is causation. That's where you were alluded to. Regardless of causation right now, we have imperative damage happening to the Coxsalla, the Chemainus, and the Coxsalla rivers and our watersheds. That's the #1 topic and the #1 fear and worry and legitimate concern right now in this entire region is our water security and our ongoing droughts and heat. So even within the context of causation, which isn't actually the focus of what's being talked about here, is how are we going to mitigate and deal with these ongoing issues we're experiencing within our communities, and how are we going to best protect so that we actually look at the least financial and economic impact on the municipality of North Cowichan and the greater area. So some don't agree with it or not, the failing to act on this is the greater economic risk we face down the future, not the short-term investment right now. On the discussion and pointing towards the engagement portion of this, as the consultant spoke, it's merely a pulse. And as to the comment on engaging with the development community, they have been engaged insofar that this was just a pulse to the feedback. The real work being done is the ongoing intergovernmental work between the CVRD, North Cowichan, and the talented staff within all those organizations that are dealing with the community every day. They're dealing with the developers, with the builders, understanding what the risks are. Our director of engineering is working firsthand with people putting in subdivisions right now saying, hey, you know what's happening right now. We're getting more flooding. Do we have to change the elevations? Are we building above the flood levels? Oh, we need to change our flood levels. We need to build higher. We need to do more mitigation for stormwater retention. These are things that are climate mitigation. That's what this report is. To say that we haven't engaged in the development community, I think is short-sighted, because we're engaging with the development community every single day across multiple departments in North Cowichan. Going back to where we're saying this engagement isn't statistically valid, absolutely it's not. It's not statistically valid. It's just an updated snapshot and a pulse on where are we right now, building on the first round of the Climate Action Energy Plan, the second round of the Climate Action Energy Plan, the entire exhaustive 4 years of the OCP, which engaged climate policies, the amazing work the CVRD has done on Cowichan Adapts, building on great groups like the Cowichan Water Stewardship Roundtable that's doing exhaustive work with regards to looking at drought, water shortages, heat waves, flooding, gravel issues in through the Chemainus River, through the CVRD. All these groups are working interplayed together. This is just building on this so that we know how we can focus so we are most fiscally responsible for the finite taxpayers' funds that we have, so we can build a sound strategy. I thought this was a really good report that's building on endless report after endless report and how we could do with that. This isn't a report about what's causing it or what there is, but the reality is these crises are in front of us, and it's something we need to deal with. So I think outside of respective Councillor Toporowski and yourself speaking, I don't want to take away from Councillor Justice, but I'd be willing to second his motion if we're at that point right now for the recommendations.
Councillor Toporowski, you want to speak first or let them move and second that? All right, sure. So moved by Councillor Justice, seconded by Councillor Stash. Over to you, Councillor Toporowski.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to thank Urban Systems, Aaron. I'm having trouble with your last name too, so, and Jennifer as well for your report today. My question was for page 41 of the agenda, 2.3, the engagement with First Nations. You had mentioned that you're going to touch on that, and I might have missed it, but how much later is this going to be rolled out for us to see? And is that going to be made presented in the next follow-up in your phase 2?
I can take that because Aaron's clearly responding to someone else. So we engaged with a multi-nation workshop with the 3 First Nations on September 25th. During that conversation, we heard that there's a desire for those participating to receive a copy of what we heard as part of that engagement, for them to go back to their councils as well to ensure that that is exactly as they want their comments characterized. So that process right now is underway, and we'll be following up with the summary and following up to get that response back. So we don't have a timeline specific on that process, but we intend to continue to pursue that relationship build and report back as soon as we're able to.
Thank you. Follow up. Thank you, Mayor. Just wanting to just point out, you in your report you talked about cisterns, grey water systems, and I think that was maybe community input as well to the survey. So there was just a few of them that caught my attention. Was rainwater collection systems like rain barrels and drip hoses. And then there was also talk about rebates possibly. So is this going to be looked into further because of, I'm just, traveling to Arizona or some places like that, they've stopped that collection of water that falls from the sky. So, so I was just wondering how that would be here. I know we do get lots of water because we're going to try to store some, right? Anyways, yeah, so that was one of them. And I think the other one was looking at our water restrictions, including North Cowichan and public places. And I think the question was answered about golf courses, I think at the very end of the report. So there, I guess I'll finish there right now.
Aaron, do you want to address how those will be accommodated in the adaptation strategy?
Sure, thanks, Councillor. Yeah, so all of the comments that are in quotations in the report, those are direct quotes from community members, and so some of those include potentially options to explore for adaptation. So all of this data, I know I said earlier that we wouldn't be processing it maybe in the way the other councillor shared, but all of this data is helping us with the next phase in terms of identifying risk statements. So there's some very specific areas and things that the community members have pointed out. So we're bringing those up for discussion with staff and making those part of the risk assessment. And then in the third phase, when we go to look at, what are the options or brainstorm some ideas around enhancing existing strengths or filling in gaps with new actions, some of these ideas will come up for discussion and whether they would address those priority risks. And it's really, it's one of those challenging things where as a municipality, you only have so much time and resources. So what to tackle first and when is always a big thing on folks' plates. And so with this, the point of the project is to help to filter through that and hey, where can we create the most resilience, in the short term and for getting that value for whatever that might cost. So this input, direct quotes from the community members will show up throughout and be considered. And we thank all the community members who did actually write some specific thoughts because those are really valuable.
And just further to that comment as well, as part of the engagement, we had an open Q&A feature on our engagement page. So that's where some of those questions and suggestions have come through. For example, and we were able to provide a response back to provide some awareness. So for golf courses or on private water systems.
Yes, I did see that response. Thank you. Also just wanted to, sorry, Mary, I'm jumping in again. The concern around food security, more or less for the water restrictions that come every year and will be coming every year. Just looking at that, I know it might have been part of the comments too, but I think that's important, the feedback from people sending in their emails or whatever and whatnot about looking at, I think there was CVRD had workshops or something you said, and just making that available for our website for North Cowichan possibly for people to participate in those, and maybe also send to the councillors we might be interested in attending one of those workshops as well. But yeah. Yeah, and it was just around, I think the concern from the individual that mentioned in the survey was about having to be restricted in those steps that we have, whatever. Anyways, I'm trying to remember. We have all sorts of things, but anyways, just feeling like they were restricted in growing the vegetables in their garden. I know that there is different methods that can be there, but that was the thing about the drip hoses and the rain barrels was a good thing in there. And those comments some of those come in the phase 2, like you'll take those comments and work that into coming to the end part, or I don't know, like step, I don't know. There's stage 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so just to respond to that, I think that's the same answer that Aaron had just provided, talking about how we would incorporate into phase 2 and 3 of this project. So a lot of these good examples we've heard through this first phase of work will show up again in different forms. So whether that be review of our water conservation bylaw to see if it's appropriate with the current state of climate adaptation, or whether it's looking at new incentive programs or examples. So none of these have been decided on. These are just examples that we've heard from the community that I think are important to capture and not lose as we move through the additional phases of this work.
I'm taking the floor now. I've got 6 more pages to go. Just kidding. I'm just kidding, Findlay. Yeah, I just wanted to mention, with engaging with First Nations, I know they may be able to get federal funding or whatnot, but also having support from the regional district and North Cowichan and maybe accessing those, and that might help in maybe having some of these initiatives come our way as well. So just a comment and a thought. Thanks, Jennifer. And Aaron.
Councillor Caljouw to close? Okay, yeah.
I just want to not point on, I don't know if this is a question or who this question is for, but the recommendation from staff just talks about this is going to seek input from the Environmental Advisory Committee. So the vote that's coming tonight is just going to actually send this report to the EAC committee to actually for them to peruse and review it, and then make a recommendation to come back to council, which will actually be the document that we will be voting on if we decide to change anything, right?
Yeah, Councillor Kell, I'll turn to staff, but I think it would be similar to the biodiversity assessment report that we refer this to Environmental Advisory Committee. They would provide their comments, and that would show up on a future council agenda. We would decide whether or not to incorporate their comments or not. Is that?
That's the question I'm asking.
Yeah, that's my understanding, but I'll turn to staff to confirm that's correct. I'm seeing nodding.
I think you answered the question.
All right. Okay. All right.
All right. Thank you.
Councillor Manhas and Findlay and Istace. One thing I would just say to council, I think we've done a really good job this term of not doing the whole back and forth that I saw a lot in my first 2 terms here. So everyone's free to talk again to this item, but I would just encourage everyone that's not going to do a protracted back and forth, because we all kind of stated our positions, and I don't think we're going to change anybody's mind right now. But over to you, Councillor Manhas.
I'd like to really quick comment.
Yeah.
I'd like to just reiterate what Councillor Findlay said at our last meeting, that through a statistical valid survey, only 7% of our residents think climate change is a priority as per our customer satisfaction survey. 7% is through a statistical valid survey.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Manhas. Councillor Findlay.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. And a couple more kind of high-level questions that I just want to understand, because it obviously comes around to the whole climate action energy plan moving forward. So this is a high-level question, and I'm sure you might not know this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If North Cowichan went 100% net zero, how much would it cost North Cowichan and its taxpayers?
On the climate action and energy plan, there's a whole section within that plan that speaks to the financial implications. The plan was costed out for all levels of action, so it's more than just North Cowichan, but it would be $500 million to implement. Of that, though, there would be a benefit back of, I believe it was 560 million savings. I might have been flipping those numbers off the top of my head. Which represents just, I think it's 1% over the life cycle of total GDP for North Cowichan.
And how would that $60 million difference come back? Like you said 500 million cost, 560 million savings. How are we saving that 60 million by implementing the net zero?
So for the climate action and energy plan, the savings would be realized through avoided carbon tax payments, increasing costs for utility, so the savings from avoided costs for utility bills. So that's how the climate action and energy plan would articulate the financial modeling.
Okay, and one last question on that is, if we went 100% net zero, how much greenhouse gases would we remove from the atmosphere by doing this at North Cowichan's level?
Within the climate action and energy plan, 80% net zero would be a reduction of approximately 80%, which was modeled. So 80% of 338,000 tons of CO2e.
Okay, so, sorry, one last follow-up. So 80% of 0.0000000144%. That's a statement, that's not a question, sorry. Thank you. You want me to work that out? So negligible in the world stage is probably the right comment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Findlay. Councillor Stash, perhaps to close.
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, it was just quick to follow up with Councillor Toporowski on the rainwater collection and rain barrel programs, to seeing that is something really topical right now. I just wanted to point out that I believe it's tomorrow night, the CRD is actually doing a Zoom meeting with Gord Baird, and it's all about rainwater collection best practices. And my question was, and I don't know if they're doing, is in with our engagement and our plan going forward out of something that maybe if there is best practices in with it, is that following up with looking into that, as Councillor Toporowski said. So I just wanted to support her in bringing that up and see if there's something we can do as just another small adaptation strategy.
Just a suggestion, or was there a question as well? Support. Okay, all right, sounds good. Okay, we've got a motion on the floor. It's been moved and seconded. Ready for the question? All in favor? And oppose? Councillors Findlay and Manhas opposed. Motion carries. We'll now move on to question period. If anyone has any questions, they're welcome up to the lectern. And I just would encourage, I know there was some discussion earlier about the zero carbon step code and the energy step code. My understanding it is coming back to council for potential adoption at next council meeting. So I just ask everyone, if you're really passionate about that one, if we could bring those comments to the next council meeting. You could provide statements of public input and then ask questions as well in the next meeting. Great, thank you.
Jennifer, I didn't quite get whether you did say there was going to be a more in-depth interaction with the public, seeing as this is not statistically viable. Will you be doing something that's more in-depth? And if so, would you be able to get the committee of a whole, the whole committee for accessibility involved so that they can actually reach the vulnerable people in our community?
Mr. Mayor, that would be up to council when it comes back. Council could provide some further direction on whether more engagement is required.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, so it's up to you at some point to see whether you...
At some point, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're in phase one. This is completing phase one after the Environment Committee has a go at it. And then we've got the two other phases for it, which will include additional engagement.
Okay. And through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Istace, when you said that we need to deal with things like the river and stuff, I totally agree with you. And I'm just wondering if we were able to move away from this climate thing, because we could log, burn, and pave the entire North Cowichan and it wouldn't make a difference. I believe in the rivers, so I'm wondering if we can actually take this and maybe use funds from the Climate Action Energy Plan. Do you have any thoughts on being able to look at this as more of an environmental thing than a climate and shift some of our focus?
Point of order, Mr. Mayor. This is not a question period for councillors. It's a question period for the chair.
Yeah, Mr. I hate to get too technical, but normally what happens is you ask the mayor the questions as the chair of the meeting, and then I determine if I'm going to answer it or if a member of staff's going to answer it. But typically it wouldn't be directed at a
Oh,
member
I
of
thought you said
council.
through you to someone, so that's fine, because Justice was next, so now I won't.
All right, but we all got email addresses, so feel free to email any of us or approach us, after the meeting.
Okay, all right. So I only have 2 other questions. At what point, Mr. Mayor, does life on Earth start to die when it comes to CO2 levels?
I'm not sure.
So right now we're at 420 ppm and it starts to die at 200. Yeah. So it's really important that people understand.
Yeah, I just say, to folks in the crowd, I understand you're passionate, but just please don't yell from the gallery. We just try to maintain, and I know you weren't Ms. Richards, I'm just saying to folks in the crowd here.
Okay, and this isn't a got you, it actually is that we're doing all of this for this, and so I think that we need to really understand, and since no one came to the town halls, no one was able to learn some of these things. And the last question is that you can hire COPE for half the price of this consulting company and we'll get more than 156 replies from you.
Great, thank you. Any other folks like to come up for question period? Ms. Benson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. So my question is, why is North Cowichan charging we, the taxpayers, another carbon tax? I heard the words right from your climate change specialist, and I've been saying that for years. We pay federal carbon tax, however many Trudeau wants to lay on us, provincial carbon tax, and municipal carbon tax. And when I tell people that, they are appalled that we are also paying a flippin' carbon tax. For what reason? And what I heard Ms. Richards say, she referred to the rivers. My question is, why are we not focusing on the environment and pollution rather than this climate activism, fear-mongering garbage that's going on? And why don't we simply clean out our rivers so that we don't have the flooding, clean out the rivers and creeks and streams that are all congested with log jams, gravel, silt, and overgrowth? If you drive around, look at any of our creeks, they're not working anymore. Clean up our environment, work on that, and fix our flippin' roads, and then leave the climate activism somewhere else, because it's really not common sense. That's my question. Thank you. Why not?
Sorry, why not what, Ms. Benson?
Why not focus on the environment and what happened to pollution? Because it's still all around us. So this whole agenda stuff that you're throwing at us is another tax. Carbon tax, carbon tax, carbon tax, carbon tax, and all the way back down again. The Trans-Canada Highway drives through here, and I've been telling you for years, we the taxpayers have no control over reducing emissions in North Cowichan, which is the goal of the Climate Action Energy Plan tax back in 2013, to reduce emissions in North Cowichan. And the other thing about a reserve fund is a reserve fund, back when I checked it a couple years ago, was to have a specific future purpose. You guys have over $500,000 sitting around, and now they're making, the environmental committee makes up ways to blow it. So it's a slush fund, and we're being ripped off, and you guys aren't paying attention, but some of you are, and I thank you for that. And ask the right questions and get the job done. And these expensive consultants are a waste of our money.
And Ms. Benson, with the climate action energy tax, it comes up every year for discussion at council. So as part of the development of 2024 budget, council determines if we're gonna collect revenue from that, and if.
I wish I'd known more about it when I was on council. No one even talked about it.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll ask if there's anyone else with questions for council. Yes, sir, if you could.
It's not really a question, just a comment.
No,
I just come back from Alberta a couple of days back. And you know what the pump prices there are in Alberta?
Sir, I appreciate your input, but
okay,
could I just ask
the pump price is $140 to $145 for the regular. What's it here?
Yeah, if I
and just for my peace of mind, I'd like somebody to define net zero for me.
I just encourage you, if you want to come to the next meeting, there's public input at the start, and that's really the best time to provide your input to council. This here is reserved for questions. I'll ask if there's anyone else with questions for council. Mr. O'Rourke?
And the question must be specifically for you, sir?
To me, but then I can determine if I'm going to answer it, if I'm going to turn it over to staff as their practice.
Okay. So, and this is, and I hope that this is reasonable, because the discussion does seem to have been very generically about the climate impact statement and moving it to this. And so what I would like to ask is, we've seen a lot of people make presentations that have made a pretty strong case that suggests that this climate action will not benefit the people of North Cowichan, nor will it benefit the people of the world. And last week you suggested this was a rhetorical question, so I would like to ask actually now, who does this benefit if it doesn't benefit the people of North Cowichan? And what is the moral imperative for those who vote for something if it actually doesn't benefit the constituents for whom you represent? Who are you representing? And that's a real question, because it's been pretty well established, I think, in this room, that it's not benefiting the people of North Cowichan. So I genuinely would like to ask, in your minds and in your morals, who you're benefiting this with the decisions to move forward this climate action plan, and specifically the greenhouse gas emissions part of it, and the removal of natural gas from new builds, which appears to be going to be retrofitting and going further. Who does benefit from this, sir?
Yeah, Mr. O'Rourke, we can debate this back and forth, but whether we're talking about the adaptation strategy, the climate action energy plan, or any of the other initiatives in this area, I think those of us supporting it would suggest it's benefiting current residents, our businesses, and future generations as well.
But you've been, well, okay, so you believe genuinely this is supporting the community. So I'm going to ask for some actual evidence of that next week, because it would appear that that's not the case, and that's not what
But I encourage you,
and
even if you don't agree with it, just look at the climate action energy plan. It outlines why we're doing this.
Absolutely.
And the same with the...
Thank you.
Yeah, all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Ask if anyone else would like to provide input. Yes, ma'am? Oh, sorry, thank you. Councillor Manhas, questions, not input. I'm just confusing everybody here. Yeah. Ms. Nielsen, if you want to come up to the lectern.
I was really nervous the first time, and I didn't mean to disrespect council.
No, it's all right. It's your first time at public input.
I don't need you to mansplain it. I just want you to
All
hear it. So I just have two things that I want to say, and I don't expect you to answer it tonight, but I ask that you really consider this in a very serious way. Amongst the consultants and the staff and the councillors and whoever else is involved, all the different, subcommittees and so on. And the fact that North Cowichan, I'm sorry, I'm very breathless for lots of reasons, but let me just take a breath here.
Yeah, take your time.
And the fact that nobody from North Cowichan Council attended any of the very sincere town halls that were held. I ask all of you to consider, do any of you know the truth about the real science connected to climate? I know what the propaganda is, and that's my word, so please. And I know what the politicians at much higher levels have led us to believe. But I ask all of you to search yourself, and do you really know what the science is? There are experts around the globe who are desperately trying to get people to listen, and groups like this, for whatever reason, haven't heard it yet. The other thing I want to mention is I've studied health of all sorts for over 50 years in a very serious way, evidence-based health, which of course ties into this. And we're doing the same thing with the climate that we do with health, which is managing the symptoms instead of working with the root cause. And I'm here to tell you that there are so many reasons and things that you need to know and consider that has nothing to do with carbon. And we are managing the symptoms, and we are not looking. Do you have any idea how many particulates of aluminum are in our air? All of our air. Or where it comes from? Or who's responsible? And here we are, trying to fix their mess with hardly any information that matters, doing the best we can as, you know, committed citizens. And I really beg you, symptom management is not the way to go. We must get to the real root cause, and that has to include weather manipulation, chemtrails, all the things that they think the tinfoil hat conspiracy theorists, you know, are talking about. You need to start listening to that, because the future generations won't survive. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. Anyone else like to step forward for question period?
I have a question. I'm wondering why on that survey there was no question asking should we be getting financial support going forward for all these new taxes and the billions it's going to cost us. And back to my retrofit. Not all of us made a boatload of money in oil and gas. A lot of us work hard just for a decent living. And these things are going to ruin us. So is there anywhere in that plan of how you're going to help the citizens financially? Or are we just all going to be ruined?
Yeah, I can turn to staff to elaborate. My sense is the third phase of this project, this is just the first phase. Third phase where it gets into actual recommendations, and that's, if there is going to be any financial analysis, that's where it would take place. Whereas this first phase is more the literature review, talking to some stakeholders, engaging with First Nations, and then that community survey as well. But the actual recommendations, my understanding is, don't come until the third phase of the project. Mr. Swabe, you'd like to elaborate on that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. More often than not, as we move forward, any higher levels of government funding that we apply for, we have to have a strategy in place, and this is what this forms the base of helping us to apply for money for other levels of government. So this is a fundamental piece.
Sorry, Councillor Manhas.
Mr. Mayor, I think the question was there any funding for the citizens because all the extra costs are going to be incurring with these
well, because we're talking about mitigation of many natural issues that are going on. That is what we're talking about applying, rather than using taxpayers' money, that we would apply for higher levels of government funding to help us offset some of the costs associated with some of that work.
So to give an example, with the wildfire mitigation, we've applied for provincial funding for those activities, or right now there's flood mitigation works being undertaken in the Chemainus River, which is being paid for through the provincial government.
Well, I mean, I like the environmental mitigation part of it, but the whole CO2 plan is just absurd and impossible.
Yeah, I'd almost try to separate them, because the climate action plan is a separate document focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. This one here tonight is more about adapting to these climate impacts. So you can almost separate the two. And
so can I ask, so when would that be about getting information on funding? And is there room for suggestions on that? Like, do we add up what it's actually going to cost each citizen? There's the number. How much support will we get to reach that number? Like, how would that
I think it depends on, like, much of it will depend on the senior levels of government. So the example with Chemainus River flooding, we've been advocating for years and years on that, and the province undertook some work last fall, and then more work was undertaken in September, but that's just really outside our control.
But, like, the government, federal government has already said what they're going to do, and that's $5,000 grant, $40,000 loan, and there's only 175,000 of those loans available in Canada. So that's what they're going to do. But you people, some of you, are voting these through. So you're causing it.
Yeah, but remember this one here, we don't have the recommendation yet. This is just the first step. And then once we get to the third step, that's when we've got the recommendations, and that'll probably give a better sense of what the costs will be. And I would assume where the funding is going to come from as well. Remember, this one's just focused on the adaptation piece rather than the climate action energy plan, which focuses on the actually reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. Okay. If you want to email me, I'm happy to send you the both documents. You can compare them. Any other questions? Mr. Lay?
So, you know, I really struggle when I sit there and I hear carbon dioxide described as a pollutant. The other, I don't know if you're aware of this, but the other name for carbon dioxide is the molecule of life, right? Without carbon dioxide, we're not here. 1,000 years ago, the Vikings were farming on the west coast of Greenland. It was warmer in the Middle Ages, warm period. Then we had the Little Ice Age, and plagues came and killed a lot of people. There was an event in the early 1800s where there was no summer. It snowed in New York City in July. South Pacific volcano went off. The whole earth was darkened. Is that climate change? Is it a climate event? I mean, I struggle because how much CO2 is in every bomb that goes off now in two major, what do they call them? Theaters? In two theaters in the world where helpless citizens are being massacred. And the kinetic energy and that's in that compared to any of this stuff is just... So I like the water catchment. I've been doing water catchment things for a long time. And slowing down the water, moving from the sky into the ocean is the general idea. And sadly, the forest industry is not really, and the government's more specifically, supposedly regulating the forest industries, have not done a very good job at all to slow down the water.
Hey, Mr. Lay, I appreciate the insights, Stratford, but is there a specific question you have?
Do you know these things? That's the question. Do you know these things?
Which things? You described a lot of different things.
Well, yeah, I know. And to make these decisions, one needs to know all of them. I mean, hemp. I haven't heard hemp. Yeah. Hemp absorbs.
Mr. Lay, I really appreciate.
Do you have hemp? Is hemp part of this plan?
But Mr. Lay, we're just discussing this one report this evening, and okay. I appreciate all these bigger issues you brought up, but the intent of the question period is questions specifically on this one report here.
About whether we're asking the right questions or not to the people?
No, it's just focused on the first phase, the summary of the engagement for the climate adaptation strategy. So there's only one item on the agenda this evening. That's why
Isn't it about the report though? The questions that were asked to people about?
Yeah, but if you have a question about those questions,
well, I'm asking why aren't these questions on that report? I guess that's.
Yeah, I think any survey, when we look back, we can probably come up with ideas on questions we should have included. But at the time, this was what was put forward, and got to work with what we got.
Well, that's true. We have to work with what we have, and I don't know about you, but what I see lining up and the dominoes that are falling now, I think that's a big question for what's going to be moving forward.
All right, thanks. Another question, Mr. Thompson, I think it is.
I have three short snappers for you.
All right.
First, could the mayor define the difference between weather problems and climate problems?
So, sir, we're talking about a very specific report, and you're asking very broad questions about the climate science.
The next question is, in legal cases, sometimes the lawyers argue that a case is moot. Do we have a mechanism to wastebasket this whole process?
Yeah, I think it's a vote of council. If majority council wants to cancel this whole thing, then 4 votes can do that.
So good. So you've got a lot of money going, a lot of time, a lot of people.
All right, thank you. All right, any other questions for council?
My name is Shannon. I've been a 20-year North Cowichan resident, proud mother, and a business owner. I have a couple things to say, and I'll try to make it short. A question. Have any of you noticed Fridays are especially thick with chemtrails in the Cowichan Valley? Has anyone else noticed that? Every Friday, have a look up in our sky and see the chemtrails. It's disgusting. Every Sunday it rains. Seems like we're on a pattern here. Anyone else notice that?
Haven't noticed it, but I'll keep an
Okay,
eye out.
well, on Fridays, I want you to go outside and I want you to look up in our skies. I've got footage and videos constantly, even in Lake Cowichan, where I also have a home. I've got videos from Friday in Lake Cowichan, how massive these chemtrails were over my house, and it made me very sad. And I think we need to really look into that. That's probably what's causing the catastrophic rivers. I'm thinking. And the forest fires and everything. I'm sorry, but...
You said you had a second question
My
as well?
second question is, Jennifer, you didn't know the answer to the percentage of CO2 in our air at this stage of the game. Can you tell me what it was 100 years ago?
Miss, sorry, the way our procedure works.
sorry, I'll look
the
at you.
questions
Thank
come
you.
to me, and then I decide if I can answer it, if I'm going to redirect it to staff.
So, Mayor Douglas,
Yeah.
so did you know that if the percentage of CO2 in the air right now is 0.04, what was it 100 years ago? Does anyone know the answer to that?
I'm assuming you do, so.
It's a lot harder than this now.
0.03 in 100 years. So I want to know where the climate emergency is. I'm not buying it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, any other questions for council? Yeah.
How could this council hire a specialist on the climate that doesn't know the answer of how much CO2 is in our air today? That's a very obvious question. It should be part of, up there in the knowledge for a climate specialist, I would think.
Mr. Mayor, I think it's not appropriate to have comments about staff, and I would
That was a question.
ask that you...
Yeah, I think if, we've got highly qualified staff here, experts in their fields, so I'm sure you could ask all kinds of technical questions that our staff could answer.
Hi, my name is Savannah. I live in the Cowichan Valley. Something that I just feel keeps coming up over and over again is the major concern of financial stress on the people living in the Cowichan Valley, North Cowichan. And this does not seem to support that. It seems to make it a lot worse. And I'm an environmentalist at heart, have always been. I'm not a climate activist and extremist though, but I do really care about the environment in my natural world. Something that I think we can probably all agree on is that the reason why we are able to focus on these issues is because we are a wealthy country and our people are better off. If we keep putting so much financial stress on our citizens, we are going to be so far down the financial crap hole that, sorry for that.
Hey, I really appreciate your comments, but is there a question?
Yeah, so my question is, do you feel that if the citizens are poorer, that they are going to care more about doing what's right by the environment, or that they're going to be more stressed out and wondering how they're going to feed their families and keep a roof over their head? Because I think that needs to matter a little bit more than this made up stuff that some people believe is true and some people don't, and yet some people are not allowed to speak about it without getting smirks. So that's just, I think we should really be considering this financial strain, because when we are a wealthy country, we can actually focus on those issues. When we are a poor country, we stress ourselves out about basic fundamental needs, not about whether or not there's garbage in the river or sea level rise or whatever we want to talk about. So that's
Thanks. Any other questions before I turn to the virtual attendees? All right, I'll ask IT staff. Do we have any virtual attendees with their hands raised?
We'll just refresh the lobby 1 moment. There are no hands raised.
All right, that concludes question period. I'll declare this meeting adjourned. Thanks, everyone.